I always believed fathers measure love in the little things, how they brag about report cards, show up for recitals, or mention you in passing to friends, but mine measured it in silence. From childhood, Dad groomed me to be invisible support staff for his ambitions, the dutiful daughter who organized files and fetched coffee while my brothers won trophies under the glow of his approval. So when the company announced his grand retirement gala, a glittering rooftop soiree overlooking the city skyline, I volunteered to manage every detail: the sax quartet, the champagne tower, even the gold leaf cake adorned with his favorite motto, "Legacy is everything." While colleagues hailed me as the perfect hostess, the truth simmered beneath my calm smile. Tonight, at last, I'd reclaim my voice from the man who never bothered to hear it. The evening unfurled like a velvet ribbon. Golden hour light brushed the skyscrapers purple. Waiters glided through clusters of executives, and a slideshow of Dad's greatest deals played on a massive LED screen. My name flickered only once, buried in 8-point font under administrative support. Yet every time another guest praised his self-made legend, the knot in my chest tightened. I watched him bask in applause, silver-templed and charismatic, lifting his engraved crystal flute with theatrical flourish. He toasted Mom for her loyalty, my brothers for their brilliance, even the janitor for keeping the place shining. And me? His eyes skimmed past as though I were a smudge on the lens of his perfect life story, the room erupting in cheers that drowned out the sound of my heart cracking. A hush settled when the music softened for final remarks, and that's when I felt the universe nudge me forward. If this story is touching your heart, I thought, subscribe and leave a like. Your support helps more unheard voices find their echo. I rose, heels clicking against marble, clutching a slim manila envelope whose weight was heavier than the heaviest champagne bottle. Conversations stalled, camera phones tilted in sudden curiosity. My father's smile froze, confusion flickering across his face as I approached the podium he'd held like a scepter all night. I slipped the envelope into his unsuspecting hands. "Before you close your legacy, Dad," I said, voice steady yet vibrating with years of restrained thunder. "Perhaps everyone should hear the chapter you left out." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he fumbled with the clasp, finding not a sentimental card, but documents stamped with forensic accountants' seals. Proof of the shadow deals he'd signed under my forged initials to hide misallocated pension funds. He paled, the crystal flute wobbling, and I, finally visible, felt the first spark of justice ignite the air. For a moment, no one moved. The envelope dangled from his trembling hand like a detonator, silent but deadly. You could hear the city traffic echoing faintly from below, the clink of a dropped fork, someone's quiet gasp. I wasn't sure what I expected: denial, rage, or maybe even a scolding glare, the kind he'd mastered since I was 6. But what I saw instead was pure, visceral fear. Not for what he'd done, but for who had finally dared to expose it. The man who taught me to never air dirty laundry in public had just been handed a laundry bag soaked in gasoline in front of every colleague, board member, and friend who believed he was integrity incarnate. He tried to laugh it off at first. "This must be some kind of joke," he said, chuckling too high, eyes darting to the COO like a drowning man searching for a life vest. But I wasn't laughing. Neither was the CFO, who stepped forward, took one glance at the notarized signatures, and paled. The murmurs began then, soft ripples of confusion morphing into suspicion, then outrage. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I had something louder than a scream. The truth, in black and white, unshakable and final. I had spent months gathering those documents, late nights digging through digital archives, learning legal terminology, following trails he thought were erased. I even hired a retired auditor to help verify every line. He thought I was just helping out in the family business, sorting files and making coffee. But I was archiving a legacy, a false one, and preparing to rewrite it with precision. The irony. I would have settled for an apology. Just once. A real acknowledgement of my worth. But instead, he forced me to choose between staying small or stepping up. And I stepped. Some guests had already started backing away, whispering, checking their phones. A few who'd once toasted him now looked at him with something close to pity or disgust. My mother stood frozen near the bar, wine glass untouched, mascara quietly bleeding beneath her lower lashes. My brothers, silent. I'd given them the courtesy of a private warning weeks ago. One called me ungrateful. The other said I was bluffing. I wasn't. Not this time. I didn't plan to speak again. I thought the documents would do the talking. But when he finally turned to me, eyes wild, voice trembling with authority that no longer carried weight, he barked, "You have no idea what you've done." And I felt it, that old ache in my chest, the one he had planted there years ago with every dismissal, every stay out of grown-up conversations, every time he credited someone else for my work. But this time, I didn't flinch. I leaned into the mic and said calmly, "No, Dad. I know exactly what I've done. I've stopped pretending." It was surreal. A retirement party that had been choreographed to immortalize his glory now felt like a crime scene. Only instead of blood, the floor was littered with whispers, side glances, and credibility bleeding out in real time. The saxophone player had quietly packed up. The champagne fountain gurgled awkwardly in the background. I looked around and saw the dominoes falling, partnerships severed in glances, investors texting their lawyers, HR trying not to make eye contact. And in the middle of it, my father, the man who once told me emotions were weaknesses, that success meant being ruthless but likable, looked suddenly very human, very breakable. He wasn't just exposed. He was stripped of the illusion that power made him untouchable. And I was no longer the girl in the corner holding a clipboard. I was the reckoning he never saw coming. Security arrived soon after. Not for me, but for him. Apparently, one of the board members had quietly made a call. They didn't handcuff him. Not yet. But they asked him to leave the premises. It was the final insult. A man celebrated by suits and sycophants, now being escorted out of his own farewell by a 20-something in a polyester vest. And as he passed me, eyes hollow, shoulders sunken, he didn't say a word. That was fine. I wasn't waiting for one anymore. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from coworkers, distant relatives, even old classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were shocked, some were supportive. A few called me brave. But what no one seemed to understand was that this wasn't bravery. It was survival. For too long, I'd kept my head down in a house that rewarded arrogance and punished authenticity. I wasn't raised to take up space. I was trained to make others look better while I stayed in the shadows. But shadows don't last forever. And the night before, I'd finally flipped the switch. The fallout came fast. Within 48 hours, an internal investigation was launched. The HR director called to thank me for my transparency, a phrase that felt both hollow and overdue. My brothers went quiet. One removed me from the family group chat. The other sent a single message. "You couldn't wait, could you?" I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. He was right about one thing. I couldn't wait. Not another year. Not another event where I stood in silence while the truth choked me from the inside. I took a walk that afternoon, through the same park where my dad once taught me business tactics while I was still in middle school. I remember being 12, scribbling notes while he explained how emotion has no place in boardrooms. It's funny. The same emotion he taught me to hide became the fire that burned down his facade. Maybe he should have listened to me instead of always correcting me. Maybe he should have seen the daughter, not just the assistant. A news outlet picked up the story by the weekend. Corporate giant faces internal scandal after shocking retirement revelation, the headline read. They didn't name me, but I didn't need credit. The vindication was in the silence. No more rehearsed speeches, no more fake smiles, just peace and purpose. The boardroom where he once sat like a king now had his portrait removed. I found out through a quiet source in accounting. Someone who used to avoid eye contact with me in elevators, now sending emails with subject lines like, "You were right." That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just lingers, making the air too heavy to breathe until the lies collapse under their own weight. A week after the party, I received an official letter from the company. Not an apology. Corporations don't deal in apologies, but an invitation. They wanted me to take over the ethics and compliance division. Apparently, my little spectacle had demonstrated a level of integrity they could no longer ignore. I didn't say yes right away. Part of me still flinched at the idea of working in the same system that had once buried me. But another part, the part that remembered late nights digging through files while tears blurred the screen, knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about prevention. About becoming the kind of leader I'd wished someone had been for me. And so, I accepted, quietly. Without a press release, no crystal flutes, no rooftop parties, just a firm handshake, a modest office, and a plaque that read, Chief Integrity Officer. I never expected to change the culture overnight. Corruption, like mold, grows in silence. But I did start making noise. I rewrote policies. I built safe channels for whistleblowers. I met with interns the way no one had met with me. And slowly, things shifted. Not dramatically. Not like the climax of a movie. But in small ways that mattered. Like an exec hesitating before pushing through a shady bonus. Or a junior employee feeling empowered to say, that doesn't feel right. And through it all, I never heard from him again. No apology, no email, nothing. But every time I walk past the empty parking spot that used to bear his initials, I smile, not out of spite, but because I survived, and because silence doesn't scare me anymore. Months passed, and with each one, I felt myself shedding the skin of who I'd once been. Not just the obedient daughter, or the overlooked assistant, but even the version of me who needed to be seen to feel worthy. I stopped seeking validation from people who were only ever comfortable when I was silent. The role I had now wasn't glamorous. It came with long hours, political resistance, and more than a few backhanded compliments disguised as advice. But it also came with something I never had before. A seat at the table I built myself. One morning, while sorting through some archived files, I found an old memo my father had dictated years ago, ironically, about whistleblower risks. His handwriting marked the margins. Never let a spark turn into a fire. I held that memo for a long time, not because I needed a reminder of what he tried to suppress, but because it showed how much he underestimated me. I wasn't just a spark. I was the oxygen. And when the match was finally struck, I didn't burn quietly. I ignited everything that needed to be rebuilt. Some days I still wrestle with guilt. Not because I regret exposing the truth, but because part of me remembers the little girl who just wanted to hear, "I'm proud of you." That girl still lives inside me, softer now, wiser. And she no longer waits at windows hoping for her father's shadow to appear in the driveway. Instead, she plants seeds, mentors younger women, speaks at panels, rewrites policies. Every time I hand a new employee the company's updated code of ethics, I see her smile in the reflection of the glass office doors. There are no monuments to what I did, no plaques, no photos. But sometimes, justice isn't loud. It's not a billboard. It's the whisper that lingers after the lie disappears. 1 year after the party, the company held a much quieter gathering, this time not for celebration, but reflection. They called it the Legacy Review Summit, a new initiative I helped propose. No fireworks, no grand toasts, just honest conversation about leadership, accountability, and rebuilding trust. I was asked to speak last. As I stood at the podium, this time not as someone's daughter, but as the architect of a new ethical culture. I scanned the room and recognized many of the same faces from that night on the rooftop. Only now, their applause wasn't forced or obligatory. It was real. I didn't mention my father by name. I didn't need to. I spoke of patterns, of silence, of what happens when institutions reward charisma over character. And I ended with a question. What would your legacy look like if no one was afraid to tell the truth about you? There was a pause. The kind that presses against the walls. And then, slow nods. I stepped down from the stage not to fanfare, but to something more sacred. Respect. After the event, a young woman approached me, nervous but determined. She said, "I almost didn't apply for this job because I didn't think women like me lasted here. But then I read what you did." Her words landed heavier than any award. I realized, in that moment, the real revenge wasn't in the humiliation of my father. It was in creating a world where daughters no longer needed to fight to be heard. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I reread the speech I'd written. I'd scratched out paragraphs, reworded sentences, trimmed metaphors. But one line had remained unchanged since the first draft. You don't have to destroy someone to dismantle what they built on your silence. That's what I had done. And I would keep doing it, not with fire, but with truth. It was a rainy Tuesday when I received the letter. Handwritten. No return address. But I recognized the script immediately. Meticulous, slanted, always in black ink, my father's handwriting. I held it for nearly an hour before opening it. Part of me feared what it might say. Another part feared it wouldn't say anything at all. I expected denial, bitterness, maybe a veiled threat dressed in corporate jargon. But what I found instead was restraint. The note was short. Just 6 lines. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know better. You did what you had to do. I taught you to survive. I didn't expect you to survive me. That's on me. No signature. No return address. Just the smell of paper aged by regret. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, letting the silence fill the room like smoke. It wasn't an apology, but it was, in its own fractured way. Acknowledgement. Maybe even surrender. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because that letter wasn't a bridge. It was a mirror, showing me that he finally saw me not as his daughter, not as his subordinate, but as a force he couldn't control. That mattered more than any late apology. Still, that night I dreamed of him, not as the man at the podium, but as the man I once waited for at school pickups, watching every car that wasn't his roll by. And I felt a strange mix of ache and peace, like finding the final page of a book you didn't know was unfinished. In the morning, I tucked the letter in the back of a drawer, not to preserve it, but to contain it. The past had already taught me enough. What mattered now was what I was building next, and I had no intention of stopping. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did I. There was no dramatic makeover, no viral speech, no thunderclap of transformation, just the quiet unfolding of a life lived without fear. I began hosting monthly integrity workshops at the company, not because it was part of my role, but because I believed in building what I never had, a space where people could speak without being punished. We didn't talk in corporate jargon. We talked like humans, about boundaries, about silence, about how loyalty isn't obedience, but honesty. One afternoon, I was approached by a new hire who looked no older than I had been when I started under my father's shadow. She said, "It's weird. Everyone here keeps saying your name like it means something big." I smiled and asked, "And what does it mean to you?" She shrugged. "Someone who didn't stay quiet." I nodded. "That's all it needs to mean." I didn't want to be idolized. I just wanted to be a reminder that even in rooms built to mute you, your voice still matters. Meanwhile, my family remained distant. Holidays came and went without the usual tension-filled dinners. My mother sent polite texts, safe phrases like, "thinking of you," or "hope you're well." She never mentioned the incident. Neither did my brothers. I suppose their silence was easier than confronting the truth I refused to bury. And that was okay. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I had already made peace with the idea that some families fracture to protect the parts of you they were never willing to accept. One night, as I closed my laptop after finalizing a company-wide ethics policy, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen. I looked tired, but not broken. Worn, maybe, but polished by fire. For years, I thought revenge would look like him falling, but it didn't. It looked like me standing. Eventually, the company went through a full rebranding, not just logos and mission statements, but something deeper, a cultural audit that stripped away decades of hushed compliance and rebuilt the foundation with transparency. They asked me to be part of the core team, and as we sat in those long sessions, sleeves rolled, egos left at the door, I realized I wasn't just helping fix a workplace. I was healing a version of myself that once thought power only belonged to those who stole it. During one of the sessions, an older board member pulled me aside. He had been at the retirement party, had toasted my father with a glass raised high in empty praise spilling from his lips. "I misjudged you," he said simply. "You didn't just tell the truth, you became it." I thanked him, not because I needed his approval, but because it confirmed something I already knew. The story had changed, and I wasn't just part of it. I was the author now. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a national leadership conference. The theme was "When Legacy Fails." I almost declined. The idea of standing on yet another stage, dissecting my pain for an audience, felt exhausting. But something pulled me toward it. Maybe the thought of one person in that crowd needing to hear that silence doesn't equal safety. That secrets rot everything they touch. That truth, even when whispered, echoes louder than power screamed. I opened my speech not with statistics or slogans, but with a single sentence. They raised a girl to obey, then punished her when she didn't. And from there, I told the truth, not with vengeance, with clarity, with dignity, with fire that warmed instead of burned. The day after the conference, my inbox overflowed with messages. Some from strangers who saw themselves in my story, women who had been passed over, professionals punished for integrity, daughters discarded for not playing small. But one message stood out. It was from the company's former legal advisor, someone who had once stood by my father's side during board meetings, offering strategic nods and silent cover. His message was simple. "You didn't burn the system. You exposed the fault lines. We owe you more than thanks." I didn't respond. I didn't need more acknowledgement. I had stopped craving applause the day I chose my truth over their approval. Still, it was a reminder that even those who once upheld the silence were now listening. The ripple I caused had become a wave, quiet but unstoppable. The company was now hosting internal storytelling sessions, giving space for others to share moments of feeling overlooked, silenced, or erased. And every time someone stood up to speak, I felt a part of my own story finally exhale. At home, life was simpler. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. Abstract pieces, mostly. Layers and layers of bold strokes, like memories colliding with possibility. No signatures, no names, just expression. I gave one away to the intern who reminded me so much of myself. Quiet, sharp-eyed, underestimated. She hung it in her office and said it made her feel brave. That was all I ever wanted, to pass courage forward like a torch. And though my father's name still echoed in certain circles, it no longer haunted me. His shadow didn't follow me into meetings. His legacy no longer defined mine. He had built something powerful, yes, but it was held together by silence. I had built something stronger, truth, resilience, and a network of voices no longer afraid to speak. It's strange how the loudest victories often arrive in silence. No confetti, no headlines, just a moment, quiet and steady, where you realize you've become the person you once needed. A year and a half after the night everything changed, I stood in a classroom of graduate students, future leaders, risk-takers, and hopefully, truth-tellers. I wasn't there as an executive. I was there as a guest speaker. They introduced me not as the daughter of Bai, but as the woman who redefined accountability and leadership. And when I spoke, I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about restoration, about how justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or headlines, but in the freedom to live without fear. Afterward, one student asked, "What would you say to your father now, if he were here?" I paused, looked out the window, and answered honestly, "Nothing. I've already said everything I needed to, by becoming someone he could never erase." The room went still, and then, the kind of applause that doesn't just come from admiration, but from understanding, from resonance. Later that night, as I walked home beneath a sky split with stars, I felt a kind of peace that doesn't shout. It just rests inside you, like a steady heartbeat. My story had started with exclusion, with silence, with a name that felt more like a prison than a legacy. But it ended here, with a life of my own design, with a truth that didn't need to be believed by everyone, just honored by me. Thanks for watching until the end. If you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next silent revenge. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest scream.